and we'll go ahead and get started here. And I'll start just with GFOA's website as well. So today, we're going to talk about rethinking revenue overall. And I hope that you all are well familiar by now with the work that GFOA has been leading on this topic. Their website is a work in progress. It's evolving as they are bringing in practitioners to bring new ideas to the rethinking revenue discussion overall. Today, we're going to focus on components of the rethinking revenue conversation, especially as it pertains to the entrepreneurial thinking in local government. And this is an area where we have made contributions to GFOA's work in the Rethinking Revenue initiative. But I wanted to kick things off just so that everybody knows the work is vast. For example, GFOA is covering urban wealth funds. We will not talk about that in today's webinar, although that is certainly worth considering for your community and your organization. We'll talk about fees and fines and forfeitures, and we'll also talk about community partnerships as it pertains to finding ways for new revenue to be brought into your organization if you are well set up to be a service provider to multiple entities overall. So it's definitely exciting to see where GFOA is headed. The rethinking revenue work as well is part of a broader framework of rethinking budgeting. And we will be speaking with Shane Kavanaugh from GFOA on a joint webinar that we're giving April 7th, which is all about the power of program budgeting as it relates to priority-based budgeting. So the pivot from pure line item budgeting overall, which is pretty much the foundation of the rethinking budgeting approach. So we're really excited about that and hope that you'll join us for that presentation. But with that, I'm going to fire up my slides and get oriented here. Thank you for dropping that in the chat, Liz. That's awesome. As we go, our webinar format today, you definitely have the opportunity to chime in for questions and dialogue in the chat. So please do so. And I'll try to keep track of things as we go. But as I mentioned, our work today is tapping into the discussion that GFOA has launched in terms of rethinking revenue. And we're really excited about this. For those of you who are priority-based budgeting practitioners with ResourceX, you know really well that we work with a blueprint, the priority-based budgeting blueprint. And for those of you who are not priority-based budgeting practitioners, I'm going to explain it very simply, and we'll use it for part of our discussion today. But the overall basic idea is that you all, as local government practitioners, you very likely are not looking at a future where you can afford to just perpetuate the status quo. You have challenges in front of you that need resources, and whether it's funding equity initiatives like some of our clients are working on, or you're trying to fund a climate action plan, or you're just trying to take care of your infrastructure, which is ever increasing in costs. Or speaking of things that are ever increasing in costs, just inflation to hold on to the basic services that we have. There's no shortage of need on this left-hand side of the screen where we just need more money in what we're doing. And so in priority-based budgeting, it is a means to an end to try to make sure that local governments don't fall short of having the resources they need to fund a far better future. So we focus on, well, what are your levers for change? You can decrease spending in certain areas and reallocate resources. That's one of our major strategies to get resources to where they need to go. Or we can also work to bring in more money somehow, some way. And so the rethinking revenue discussion overall is highly focused in this bottom right area, which is very exciting. In the priority-based budgeting efforts, we have worked so hard on resource reallocation, highlighting communities who have managed to reallocate upwards of 10% of their budget. And that is admirable, but that's the expense side. And while you can go a great distance in reallocating your expenses overall, this whole thought on where are we going to find new revenue, what are new avenues to explore, this is an exciting frontier. So I hope today that we are able to share some of the innovative things that our clients are working on, but also hear from you in terms of ways that you're looking to explore or rethink your own revenue. So just to tell the rest of the story on the blueprint and explain it again for those of you where this might be new, think of it as just kind of a balanced equation. It's the budget. We try to work with our priority-based budgeting cities and counties to say, geez, imagine it's 3 to 5 years down the road, and you're looking back right now. What do you hope that you have funded in a substantial way, or thought about in a different way? If it's 3 to 5 years down the road and you haven't grown a particular program, it's bad news. So like, again, whether that's funding a climate action plan or your infrastructure or cybersecurity overall, these are things where we are definitely intent on getting resources to fund these things. And now it's just a question of how. So as we look over on the right-hand side of the blueprint, then this is the how. So we have the revenue side of the equation. And thus far, you know, for most of us, the idea is our organizations have only been able to grow to the extent that our local economy is growing, and our property tax valuation is growing, or our sales tax. And that this is the heart of what GFOA is describing in their work in rethinking budgeting, is that number one, this is, you know, thinking about property tax is one of the first places they start. Property tax is no longer completely tied to the overall value or wealth created in any given region. And therefore it's disconnected to the extent that a region, their wealth and the value that they're creating is disconnected from property tax valuations, then they're openly wondering, is this appropriate to be the governor, the limitation on revenue growth that we can fund our services, programs, and projects with? And that's what they're saying, it's probably not. Furthermore, as it pertains to taxes and rates, this bottom right section, GFOA goes on to say, and layer on other complicating issues. For example, our residents are less inclined to desire to be paying more for local government, for any level of government these days. The level of political tension that exists right now also is making it more challenging to imagine how taxes and basic rates are going to increase, where we're going to get agreement. So the premise of GFOA's work is saying, if we can't count on this, and this is what we're saying as well, it's kind of a last resort. It's always a little bit out of our control. If we can't count on taxes to grow and to provide an incredible windfall for us to fund the things that need funding on the left-hand side, then either A, we don't fund the things that are on the left-hand side and we're left unable to fund the future, which is completely inadequate for the types of challenges that are in front of us, or we do fund them, but we just have to get clever. We have to come up with new ways to rethink our revenue opportunities. So as GFOA has mentioned, entrepreneurial thinking, fees and charges. This is a major area that we're going to focus on today. There is an equity lens to the way that we're collecting fees and charges that is also highly appropriate for today. And how do we understand that we might even forego certain revenue streams? All of that has to be considered in a modern approach to budgeting. And then as well, when it comes to partnering, we might find ourselves in a great situation where we can actually provide programs and services to other entities and act like a business and generate new resources coming in. So we're going to cover both of these today. What we won't cover today, but is also an equally exciting part of the equation, is freeing up and reallocating resources. That's what we're going to cover far more in the rethinking budgeting discussion, program-centric budgeting, and priority-based budgeting, but that is not part of the scope for today. So the first section that we wanted to get into was the whole notion of what does it mean to take an entrepreneurial approach to your revenue streams. This is, we have 4 levels of mastery. There's only 4. And one of the 4 is all about how can we reallocate resources and maximize new opportunities for resources to come into the organization. And so on this whole idea of maximizing new income streams, this is what we're going to get into here. So fees and charges, bottom right-hand side of the blueprint. One of our more inspiring stories comes from Washington County, Wisconsin, and their parks department. So Washington County implemented priority-based budgeting. For those of you who are new to this, all that it means is they shifted from line item budgeting to now a framework where they have identified or come up with an inventory of every program and service that they offer within the departments. They allocate their line items to those programs. They know what they cost. And then those programs went through a scoring or alignment process relative to what they believe are the results that make their community exist, define the relevance of the local government organization. And so in priority-based budgeting, every program goes through the scoring exercise, and you can rank them. You can see the programs that are really highly aligned with achieving the strategic plan as compared to other programs that have less to do with the results that you're trying to achieve. We put them into quartiles. There's quartile 1, quartile 2, 3, and 4, which are just shorthand for quartile 1 are very highly aligned programs, quartile 4 less aligned. So Washington County goes through this entire exercise, and among the programs that ranked really low in Washington County, they came from their parks department. So a wise observation in priority-based budgeting is wherever you have general government resources, those that you are not restricted in their use, wherever you have general government resources where you could truly reallocate those from the program that they're invested in today to other programs, the question is, why would you invest general government resources, especially from the general fund, into low priority areas, quartile 3 or quartile 4? And where you are doing that, it's a rational question to say, maybe we can divest ourselves of those investments and put them into other programs that need funding. And so that's exactly what happened in Washington County. Their parks programs were now on the chopping block. This doesn't always happen in other organizations where parks programs are more in line with their community results. It happened in Washington County because that's the nature of the results that define why they are in existence. So here you are, you've got the parks department, and if you're also wondering, in Washington County, the vast majority of the parks programs were subsidized by property taxes. So they did not have fees coming in whatsoever to pay for those programs. These were subsidized programs in general. As the board was desiring to move forward and say, okay, we need to save money, we're going to pull back and just get out of the parks business, the reaction from the parks director at the time and the county administrator, Josh Schoeman, was, what if we could rethink revenue? Right now, parks is funded by general government revenue, by property tax subsidization. Is there an option where we can still maintain all of these parks programs, give you back the general government resources that are used today to fund our programs, but we're going to rethink our revenue streams and try to come up with a different way to fund ourselves? And so from 2019, That's when the this particular plan came out, the fiscal sustainability plan for Washington County Parks from 2019 to 2020 to 2021. They embarked on a game plan to explore with their residents. Would they be willing to take on certain fees? Would they be willing to entertain certain partnerships with other jurisdictions? And can the parks move from completely dependent on the general fund to stay in business to 100% self-reliant, in control of their own destiny? And they achieved it. You can download their report. Please do. You can just go to Washington County Parks, type it in exactly as you see here, Washington County Parks Fiscal Sustainability Plan, and you will see all of the different types of approaches that they came up with, sponsorship and naming rights for some of their parks that they were able to sell, revenue generating park user fees on day passes, annual passes, and partnerships overall. Back to the blueprint, finding ways to entrepreneurially think about ways to bring in new revenue. By 2021, this was the first year where they were completely non-subsidized. And while I can imagine, as I've told this story before, sometimes there's the distracting point is that this is parks. And so sometimes people who are listening to this presentation will say, geez, I really hope that parks don't get cut. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is for any of your organizations and your department heads, if they can think of the future where they're not entirely dependent on whether or not there's property taxes available or sales taxes available to be carved out so they get their slice of the pie. What's inspiring about Washington County Parks is that they said, what if we said, we'll give you all of your general government resources back, and we're going to come up with our own path to pay for ourselves and chart our own future. That's what they did. And if parks can do it, I think other departments can do it as well. And I think that's probably the most inspiring and exciting part of this story. So this is just a snapshot. I just picked this up yesterday from their 2022 budget update. But they have annual park pass revenues. They have daily park pass revenues. They have shelter revenues, camping, cabin revenues. They have sponsorships. They have beer gardens in the park where the private sector is able to come in, rent space, charge more money as well. But again, the punchline here is that here's a department that went from 100% subsidized to now 0% subsidized. Those general government resources are now back in the pot to be able to fund left-hand side of the blueprint stuff, new programs that need to be funded in Washington County, Wisconsin. So you think about this creative way to approach new revenue generation. And if Washington County is on one end of the extreme, we look across the priority-based budgeting community for, in general, the programs that are already charging some amount of revenue, and whether or not there's an opportunity to just get to cost recovery. So this is back to GFOA's basic fees, fines, forfeitures, and so on. This chart is actually slightly outdated. I need to do an update, but it was a really broad snapshot of everyone who had implemented priority-based budgeting, analyzing costs and revenues just for those programs where they were already charging a fee. So if anything, this is probably getting bigger. But what the chart is meant to illustrate, especially this part in the bottom right, if you just looked at the programs that are already charging a fee, and for some of those programs, you know this is the same in your organization, the revenues coming in for the program do not achieve 100% cost recovery all the time. So you might have some programs where the program revenue is at 75% of the program, and there's a little bit of money on the table. You might have programs that are at 50% or less. This chart is illustrating the money that is left on the table, so to speak. And the amount of money, if you looked at all of the revenues on average that a priority-based budgeting community brings to the table, taxes included. This is taxes, fees, and grants. So you can think of the green bar as the size of your budget, at least your operating budget. The amount of money left on the table on average is equal to 16% of your operating budget. That is a huge amount of money. That is indicating all of the revenues that could be charged to get us up to 100% cost recovery just for those programs that are already charging a fee. This is not even getting to programs where you have not thought of a new fee to collect. So if you do that math for yourself, if you took 16% of your operating budget and said, if you're like the rest of the priority-based budgeting community, that's probably what's on the table for you. Clearly, we could chip away at that. We could say 16%, it's a huge amount of money. Throw 5% out the window to say our board, our council would never approve a pay increase to get to 100% for a third of these programs overall, because maybe it puts you at a competitive disadvantage with neighbors in the region or something of that nature. Great, take 5% and throw it away. Take another 5% and say, there's statutory limitations. There's good reason why we can't charge a higher fee for a host of programs that we provide. They're limited by the state. No problem, throw another 5% out the window. Even if you just got down to something on the order of 5% of your operating budget in new revenue, that would be immense. And that's the point of what we're analyzing here. As we look across different organizations from Shawnee, Kansas, the amount specifically available for them is 16% of their operating budget by way of revenue, 12.5 million. Goodyear, Arizona, 9%. And on the right-hand side, you see a wide range from 11% in Joplin to 24% in Boise, Idaho. And that's the 16% area overall. We just put this out here to say, you probably know this already. I think that's what shines through in GFOA's work in rethinking revenue as well, is oftentimes we do know this. Oftentimes we probably have the data, certainly getting down to the program level and understanding what every program costs and the revenues coming in and where you are on a cost recovery spectrum for every program that you provide. That's the kind of data that we're advocating for, that we hope that you would generate as well. But we see this as inspiring, no different than Washington County Parks, to say, what if there really were new revenues out there that we could collect, that were appropriate to collect, and that we can make sure that we're not falling short on the things that we need to fund. Now, I say all this, and we just spent the last year and continue to support a number of organizations who participated in Bloomberg Philanthropies City Budgeting for Equity and Recovery program. And this was a completely awesome and inspiring initiative that we supported with GFOA for the Bloomberg organization. 28 cities participated overall. And among the objectives of this program was, how can cities ensure that they are getting resources towards their equity objectives? And we did discover that in some cases, cities were wanting to reconsider punitive revenues that were actually having a negative effect on their equity objectives. Denver, Colorado was one of those. And among a poster child for one of their examples, among many, was one of their impound lots where they take cars that have been towed, and the fees that are required in order for somebody to reclaim their vehicle were disproportionately out of the league of affordability for many residents who have had their vehicle towed away. So this just being one example, whereas we rethink revenue to try to get more on the table, there very well might be instances where we have to rethink how our fines systems are impacting our residents from an equity perspective, should those be among the goals and values of your organization. All right, so that is the first part that I wanted to get into. The second part in GFOA's approach is more on the partnership side of things and where revenue can be made if we start to look outside of our borders. We participate with GFOA in 2 papers. One of them is about networked enterprises, is what they describe it as. But the whole concept is that your local government is one enterprise, the private sector and nonprofit are other enterprises potentially in your region. Even in Creede, Colorado, where there's not a whole lot of service providers everywhere, you still have the county, you still have the private sector, you still have nonprofits. So we've seen this work out even in some of the smallest regions as well. And we also worked with GFOA on their government as a platform concept. And this is a really neat idea. The concept is, if you think about local government as an iPhone or a smartphone, whatever your preference might be, and the services being provided are like apps or services on your phone. You have a service that an app that you go to access the web. You have a calendar app to keep track of your appointments. You can use your smartphone as a phone, and so there's a phone app, and on for games that you play. Those are, if you think of the apps as services, and then make the leap that those services would be the kind of things that you see in a community: trash collection, police protection, parks maintenance, and so on and so forth. The idea of government as a platform is local government doesn't need to be the provider of every single app on the ecosystem. There might be others who local government as the platform shepherd, providing security and making sure the programs that are being provided meet certain standards and regulations. But we can open up a different type of ecosystem by allowing the app providers to be from the private sector, nonprofit, other local governments, and expand our partnerships and our reach. That's what government as a platform is about. The analogy that you'll read in that paper, when the iPhone first came out, Apple thought that they were going to provide all of the apps on the Apple iPhone. That was just their assumption to begin with. Much like a local government saying, we're going to provide all the services that our residents depend on us to receive. And that might be true for a certain period of time, but then time goes on and it's always an assumption worth questioning. Well, when the iPhone rolled out, it wasn't long before some of the users were indicating displeasure with the apps available. They had a wider range of imagination for other apps that could be provided. And they also thought they could do a better job at replacing some of the current apps that were being provided on the phone, like a calendar app. And so within a short period of time, there were, they call them jailbreakers, I think is the term, but people who broke into their operating system and were adding new apps. And this was proliferating. And Apple considered this like potentially a problem, but they had a conundrum. What are they going to do? Would Apple lock down their system, their operating system, and say only apps developed by programmers at Apple are allowed on the phone? Or, you know the rest of the story, they created what would become known as the App Store, which is an approved marketplace of other potential service providers, so that Apple was recognizing we're not the only possible provider of these applications, of these programs and services. We are encouraging others to come in. And when Apple did that, they made money. It's rethinking revenue. So now you have the Apple guarantee and assurance of quality, and there's a fee to be paid to participate in the approved marketplace overall. So how does this relate to government? That's my final point, and then I'll share some examples. If government can see itself, much like Apple did, as the owner of the ecosystem, yes, you need streets to be plowed. Yes, you need garbage to be collected, and it has to meet certain standards, but perhaps we can come up with other service providers who can do it. Maybe they do it more efficiently. And then we can find a revenue stream from that, or we can be the service provider, strike up partnerships, enact entrepreneurially and generate revenue for partnerships that we provide. That's the overall concept. So let's see how this has played out. We think about the whole idea of sourcing or partnerships across a region, and there are many challenges to this. It's not that partnerships haven't been tried before. There are just general questions about control that usually come up, and sometimes partnerships can be a real hassle and a nuisance, but we've seen them work out where they can be advantageous and create a real win-win in a given region, where one entity now gets the benefit of a service for less money than what it was costing them before, and another entity is starting to bring in new revenue. So it's actually a win-win on both the revenue generation and the resource reallocation side. Eric Keck is on our team here at ResourceX, and he's the former city manager of Inglewood, Colorado. And before that, another priority-based budgeting community called Post Falls, Idaho. So he implemented priority-based budgeting twice. When he was in Inglewood, he used the concepts as he was rethinking revenue and also overall efficiency to realize that Inglewood had a fleet operation that was large enough when compared with very small neighboring communities like Sheridan here in Cherry Hills Village, and even their school district, Inglewood Schools. He realized that this is an operation that had capacity in order to absorb more services to provide to some of the neighboring entities. And through dialogue with their city managers as well, came to find out that for Sheridan, having its own fleet maintenance shop and garage and maintaining its entire vehicle fleet, heavy equipment, light duty, and so on, is really expensive to a smaller city. And Sheridan was falling behind on their routine maintenance, and the same with Cherry Hills Village. And furthermore, some components of the Inglewood school fleet overall. So you have 4 entities here, and none of them are doing really great on their own. But to come up with a centralized service, a fleet operation in the city of Inglewood, and Inglewood's not that big for some of you communities on the line. If you look up the population for the city of Inglewood, it's not like it's a major city in the metro area. It's not like Denver, Colorado, or anything like that. So if Inglewood can do it, then many of you can do it as well. But the realization that if they picked one, they only have one set of facilities. They have one director. There are plenty of efficiencies to be achieved. They came up with a cost allocation model, so all of the customers paid into Inglewood. The cost for Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village went down, even as they are paying Inglewood to receive fleet maintenance services overall. The cost of Cherry Hills Village, Sheridan, and Inglewood schools go down. For Inglewood, their revenues go up. Yes, they had to provide an extra level of service now to be able to provide great services to Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village, but the costs were small compared to the overall revenue that was coming in. So this is a massive win-win. And we bring it up in the Rethinking Revenue conversation because the question for you all is, where can you be Inglewood Fleet? What service do you provide where you could begin to consider how other entities might pay you for that service? And you could generate new revenue. Yes, you might have to staff up to provide a certain program, but that's the business model. That's the overall idea. When we shared this, thanks Eric. Yeah, population 35,000. Why is that important? Because many smaller communities, 35,000 or less, will think to themselves, there's no way we can be a hub to do the Inglewood Fleet example. We're too small. But when you look at Inglewood compared to Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village, they're actually just bigger than some of those neighboring entities. And then you don't even have to just think about cities next door. What about nonprofits? We did this, whoops, I'm going to skip to one story down the road here. We did this in Clear Creek County. Clear Creek County, I love the population. This is for county government. And all the cities included. But Eric, you might have that number. Clear Creek County is not a large county organization. And they had the same idea, kind of like Inglewood Fleet with their neighboring organizations, where they went through, they had their program inventory, they documented their costs, and they wanted to come up with as many opportunities for partnerships that they could determine. And if you think about a small county, they were imagining to themselves, they'll probably be the one who's farming out services to some of the other entities. But instead, one of the emerging opportunities from Clear Creek was back office payroll operations and benefits management and those sorts of things that take place to pay employees on time. They had brought in numerous nonprofits. Yeah, Clear Creek County, 10,000 people as an entire county. They had a host of nonprofits who took interest. The perspective from the nonprofit organizations is they have payroll too, and their budgets are infinitesimally small. And so for them, they end up having like a fractional person who can barely get the payroll done on time in a nonprofit organization's budget. They face pressure from those who they serve for their overall administrative costs. And so they can't hire somebody who's full-time doing payroll and benefits administration. And so the function really suffers. But if you gather 10, 15, or 20 nonprofits like Clear Creek County, and they're looking to the county organization, who again, just like Inglewood Fleet, could staff up incrementally to handle the demand of numerous nonprofit organizations, but bring in even more on the revenue side, the service level for payroll and benefits goes up for the nonprofits, they're paying less, and the revenue for Clear Creek County goes up. This is the kind of thing that we're hoping to see more and more of. Another example along these lines, and this is related to rethinking revenue, is Washington County again. So they took this concept of partnership ideas and where one entity might be really best served to be the service provider, and they rolled it out. They actually invited all of their neighboring county organizations to scour the program and services inventory that Washington County had come up with in their priority-based budgeting work, just looking for Inglewood Fleet opportunities. One of the major opportunities that came up was the idea to not merge where, like Inglewood Fleet, where one local government takes on providing all of the services and sells them back to another entity, but they looked at a joint venture, a merger for a health department. So they had two neighboring counties, both of them provided a health department and all the services that come with it, and they merged together. In the merging, they found numerous duplications of programs for sure. So they eliminated the duplication, but they did not eliminate the staffing for those programs overall. So what do you end up with? You have a lot of people who now are jobless because they've eliminated the duplication of services offered. They took that workforce and reallocated them to new programs that neither one of the entities was able to provide before. So now for the exact same cost of both health departments, they're providing new services overall, not necessarily a rethinking revenue strategy, except for this. The only way that both of those entities would have been able to provide the new services before was if they raised new revenue to provide those new services. But through an efficiency of a merger, a joint venture of the merged health department, they could rethink revenue from the standpoint of avoiding a tax increase and at the same time providing new services overall for their health departments. While this was a tremendous story, I think the first time that we heard this was back in 2018, 2019, when all was said and done. The power of this partnership really came to life during the outbreak of COVID-19 and the pandemic, when from a health department perspective, the new level of service that they could provide when it pertained to contact tracing, among other things, was beyond what was even being provided down here in Milwaukee, which both Washington County and Ozaukee County, is their neighboring community with the health department merger, we're very happy about, that they were able to provide this massively needed service, and they didn't require new revenue in order to do it. I know Sama Fox is on the line from Littleton. Early on, we tried something as well with two neighboring jurisdictions. We mentioned Englewood, Colorado, and Sama is in if you're not familiar with the Denver metro area, Littleton, Colorado is pretty much right next door. And one thing that these two organizations were able to do is share their program inventories in order to just try to create this perspective. Where might an opportunity exist? Now, earlier I described that without extreme motivation to rethink revenue or come up with new resources overall, partnerships they can be cumbersome. They can come with more headache than an organization desires. You'd rather just provide your own programs and take care of them. You have your own facilities, you have your own staff. So partnerships are not always a cakewalk, and I think everybody knows that and appreciates that. However, if we are on the GFOA, in the spirit of what GFOA is saying, that if we're zooming out and we're really thinking big picture about what needs to get funded for our future, the left-hand side of that blueprint, and we realize the strain of finding the resources required to tackle some of society's major challenges for the future, then what are we left with? Partnership opportunities are one of the key areas that we suggest have enormous potential if we could embrace them. I showed the chart earlier about 16% is money left on the table from a program revenue perspective. As we have gone through and worked with priority-based budgeting organizations and identified where the local government itself is pretty much on its own in terms of providing a program, there are no other partner opportunities overall compared to the programs that same local government is providing, where there is opportunity to partner or consider an Englewood fleet type of situation. The breakdown is about 60-40, where 40%, the lesser part of the pie, appears to be what local government is tasked with providing, and it's unique to them. There really isn't a partnership opportunity. Again, this is on average for the communities that we've worked in, whereas 60% of the portfolio, 60% refers to the budget, by the way. The budget invested in programs is 60%, where those programs are definitely opportunities for partnership. Will you find that you end up creating partnerships for 60% of your budget? Probably not. But even if we started at 10, might this be a great way to start to explore where we can come up with partnerships and generate new revenue? On that note, I'm going to share the rest of the Clear Creek County story. I'll share one more from Moffat County, and then would love to entertain some questions as well. So I'd mentioned in Clear Creek County, they created their program inventory. They shared the program data with nonprofits, with cities within the county, and even with the private sector. At the end of all of their work, they found that this big green chart is the summary of all of the programs and the multitude of agencies who are providing the same program as Clear Creek County. In the end, 78.9% of Clear Creek County's budget was invested in programs that others also provided, therefore representing a significant opportunity to consider these Englewood fleet type of situations. They had fleet. That was a big one that stood out for them as well. Clear Creek County has fleet. Clear Creek County Schools has fleet. All of the cities within the county has a fleet operation. And so this is a major area for them. So that leaves about 20% of their budget invested in programs that nobody else is really providing. And it's really up to Clear Creek County to continue providing them if they still think those programs are important. When we did this in Moffat County, last story I'll share. So maybe like Creed, I think you would appreciate this. But Moffat County really was enthusiastic about this concept of how can we create a program map? Who's doing what? Where are the partnerships that we could create? Because when you're when you're remote, like Moffat County is, you really don't think of yourself as having any other possible service providers. So they invited their hospital, they invited their community college, the county seat. I think they had the YMCA who came in their local school district. So Moffat County had their list of programs in the program inventory, shared them with the other entities who came to scour and look for opportunities. It was only a little bit into this session, this program mapping session, where the hospital director, the executive director of the regional hospital there, was looking at Moffat County's programs and noticed laundry services being provided by the county. And so the hospital director strikes up a conversation saying, "You guys provide laundry? I had no idea. You're the county government." When I think of county government, I think of sheriff and clerk and recorder and county surveyor and district attorney. I don't think of laundry. Well, it turns out that Moffat County does have a detention center where they are doing a lot of laundry, and they have a pretty robust laundry capability. And they also ran a small nursing home that had other laundry capabilities. Until we got down to the program and service level, none of that was apparent to generate a partnership discussion. It turns out, from the hospital's perspective and why their executive director was so interested in this, you know that a hospital has huge laundry demands for the staff, scrubs and uniforms and the bedding and everything that goes along with keeping a hospital clean. And they don't have an on-site laundry facility. So they ship their laundry from Craig, the county seat of Moffat County, 2.5 hours every week to Grand Junction, the nearest capable laundry facility, not knowing that right across the street, Moffat County offered laundry and they could have been partnering, just like the Inglewood Fleet example. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for the hospital. They have a full-time driver, a vehicle in the fleet. Speaking of fleet, they're driving 2.5 hours back and forth every single week. They would not want to continue to do this if they could strike up an entrepreneurial business opportunity right there in town. These are the types of opportunities that become available to you if we can get to a program inventory. We can share the data with our neighbors. We call this program mapping as a technique. When Moffat County went through this exercise just with a handful of providers in their own community overall, much like the earlier average chart, they had 59% of their budget is invested in programs where there are clear partnership opportunities, and about 40% where the county is apparently on its own, uniquely qualified to provide a program if they choose to provide it overall. Yeah, Randy, what a crazy story, right? So in our work, with 9 minutes left, we do this. We create program inventories. We create the costs of every program, and then we start to look for opportunities on the blueprint. In our tools, we call these insights. We tag programs with insights. Is there an opportunity here to partner and generate new revenue overall? So that'd be, if I was in Moffat County and I offered laundry in the detention center, that'd be a program. And the revenue generating opportunity is, hey, the hospital next door is in high demand for this program. I'm going to note that as an insight, something that we should take advantage of in the future. Or if I'm Inglewood Fleet, I'd say we have other communities who I know are falling behind on their fleet investments, and we have a revenue generating opportunity right in front of us to consider how we might merge. An insight is a programmatic idea, and this is what we hope to generate in the tools. For those of you who are in priority-based budgeting, that's why I just wanted to quickly show you, if you have not participated in the Insights program already, this is something that we offer to try to maximize your opportunities for rethinking revenue and just get the ideas on the table. This is something that we would facilitate and offer to your community. So please be in touch with us if it's something that you're intrigued with, and this is what we'll follow up with as well. For those of you who are brand new to all of this, getting your program data together is most importantly step one. So getting your program inventory, getting your program costs, so then we can talk about your potential opportunities for creative revenue generation like Washington County Parks did where are your fees and charges? Where do you stack up on the 16% chart overall? And then where might you partner? That's where you would get started along this path if you didn't have the data already. 7 minutes left. Please use the chat if there's any areas that you wanted me to go back and revisit, or any open-ended questions on revenue that you might be thinking about as well. But it's been exciting to tell the tales from the front lines where, yes, reallocation of resources on the expense side is also fertile territory to come up with resources to fund your future, but rethinking the revenue side of the equation is just as spectacular, and hopefully you found some inspirational ideas today. I know we can't come off mute in the webinar format, but I'll just wait here for just a second to see if there's any other questions that are coming up. We sure appreciate your time. Thank you, Linnea. And I think with that, we could probably bring this to a close. We sure hope to hear from you and some of your ideas on rethinking revenue. And if anything, again, sparked your interest from today that you'd like us to follow up on, we would love to do so on any of the fronts that we talked about. How do you go forward with an Inglewood Fleet or Washington County Parks, alleviating yourself from entirely from general government dependence and seek financial independence? Thank you, Chess. Thanks, Sama. Sam, I'll be talking to you next week. Looking